In 2007, you stepped into a mess. Not only was it a mess, but you had national spotlights all over you. What advice do you have for pastors who are stepping into something that is extremely challenging, to say the least?
Well, there's lots of things I would tell them. Number one, don't do it by yourself. And in fact, you're writing your death warrant as a pastor if you step into a situation without big brothers, spiritual dads, mentors, coaches. I was so blessed at the time that I stepped into my transition following a national scandal at a very prominent church that I had men like Robert Morris from Gateway Church and Jimmy Evans, and I had guys named Larry Stockstill and Jack Hayford. All these are friends, not just people that I know, but these are people that would take my phone call, that would come and see me. I could go see them. I would tell young leaders, if you're stepping into a place where there's chaos and confusion, my prayer every day was for wisdom from the Holy Spirit. And wisdom comes obviously through prayer and through study of the scriptures, but wisdom most often comes in leadership crisis from other seasoned, mature leaders. And I'll give you one example of that. A man gave me some good advice before I ever set foot on the New Life campus. He said, Brady, there's going to be three groups of people that you're going to encounter when you go there. And this man had also followed a very prominent pastor who had a scandal. He had become the pastor after him. And this was back in the 1980s. So this has been going on, regrettably for 30 or 40 years. And he said, Brady, I learned something very valuable. He said, there's going to be three groups of people there. The first group of people, they're going to trust you immediately because you're their pastor, and they just have been taught to trust their pastor. He says those are the people, Brady, that are going to be the greatest source of encouragement for you. You need to lean into those people. These are not yes people. These are people that just really understand the call of pastor, and they're going to love you, they're going to encourage you, and they're going to be the wind in your sails. He says the second group of people will be people who want to trust you, but they've been hurt, and this is the first time they've really been deeply hurt by abusive or misleading leadership. And Brady, they will trust you over time, but you're going to have to do what you say, mean what you say. You're going to have to be true to your word and be predictable around them. And over time, they will become great allies for you. He said, but Brady, then there's a third group of people I really want to warn you about. These are people, they're good people, godly people, but this is not the first time they've been hurt by a pastor. And this is, in their minds, they've been hurt 3 or 4 times. They think this is always going to be the case. They've made an inner vow that they'll never trust another pastor again. And Brady, they will make your life miserable from time to time because you're going to go to bed at night knowing you didn't do anything wrong, that your heart is pure and clean before God, but they simply will not trust you. And eventually, Brady, they will leave the church. And Brady, don't let that depress you. There's nothing you have done, and there's nothing you can do to help in their healing. That's between them and God. And I tell you, that played out. I've been at New Life now 5.5 years, and that played out exactly the way he predicted. There's a group of people that surrounded my wife and I and my kids. There was another group of people that in 3 to 4 years, they've all come to me and said, I didn't trust you at first, but I really trust you now. We're on board. Let's go do this thing and, do what God's doing. And there was a group, we lost several hundred people, but they were there when I got there. But they just couldn't make the turn. I mean, it wasn't anything I was doing, and his words echoed so well in my mind because, I think if we were all honest as pastors, we want to be liked, and we want to be trusted, and we want our motives to be seen as pure. But when someone else has hurt them, and other pastors have betrayed their trust, sometimes it's impossible to regain it.
What can you tell us about your relationship with Ted Haggard specifically? And over time, as you came in, what was your contact with him as there was an agreement of what the severance and distance and other understandings would be? And then as that changed, how did you process that relationally?
Yeah, it's been hard. It's been difficult. I said from the very beginning when I came to New Life, I said it before I ever met Ted and Gail, and I had never met them when I knew of them. Obviously, they were very well known, but I had never met them. And I said, nothing will give me greater joy than to see a restoration process be successful with them and have Ted and Gail come back on the stage at New Life, have me and the elders lay our hands on them and send them out to their next ministry assignment. And I mean that. I mean that even today. I meant that then. My initial meetings with Ted when he moved back into Colorado Springs, I was here about 1.5 years when he moved back to town. I met with him several times. What happened is his idea of what it meant to be restored and my idea of what it meant and our elders, our church's idea of what it meant to be restored are different. And so I wish him well. I hope he does at some point go through a restoration process. In his mind, he has, but I think it's hard for the person who violated the church to declare himself restored. I I think the person who was the violator needs to have others come alongside him and with wisdom, with tremendous grace. There was no judgmental thought. I mean, our church immediately forgave Ted, and our church thinks the best of Ted and wishes him well. I just think that it's very hard for high-profile pastors to really submit themselves to a long-term, and I'm not talking about an excruciatingly long restoration, but I do think it takes 1 to 3 years of really intentional help, intentional love and care from a group of people, which we tried to surround him with. And regrettably, it didn't. He left that process. He would say that he chose to leave the process. And he started a church 5 minutes away from New Life, and so that does create tension sometimes, but it does not now. It did 2 years ago when he started the church, but New Life has moved on to the new thing that God's called it to. We're thriving and growing and planting churches and opening campuses and sending out missionaries and baptizing hundreds of people every month. And so our story is not what most stories. Our story is a miracle story. I know that. I'm aware of that. But for Ted and Gail, I would do anything the Lord asked me to do to be a part of the restoration process. And I know my elders feel the same way.
The falling of the previous pastor was sobering. There, but by the grace of God go I, was a challenge to everybody. What safeguards have you put into place for yourself, for your key staff, to help ensure that something like what happened with Ted Haggard doesn't happen in the future?
Well, I think what was missing with Ted was he did not have really fathers. He had some older brothers and uncles, I would call them, but spiritual dads in his life that he had. I have these guys' numbers on my speed dial. Robert Morris would take my phone call right now. Tom Lane would take my phone call right now. But those are guys that don't live here. So I've also surrounded myself with men. For example, I have a pastor on my staff. His name is Garvin McCarroll. He has known me 20 years. He's older than I am. He is an employee of mine, but he's known me 20 years. And I talk to him almost every day. His office is right next door to me. And I'll give you an example. There was a woman that about a year ago that came to me after church. And I knew that her marriage was really messy. Her husband had confessed to me in a counseling session that their marriage was messy. She's a very attractive woman who had a lot of emotional needs at the time. And she spent a lot of time with me at Guest Central, and I could tell this is a problem. Well, my friend Garvin, who's my 20-year friend, was standing there. When she walked off, I walked over to him and I said, "Garvin, you see that lady right there?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "If you see me joking around with her, talking about her, spending too much time in the hallway with her, I want you to break my kneecaps." And so that's and I've done that 2 or 3 times. I understand as a pastor and a leader that we all have a bullseye on our chest from the enemy. He wants you strike the shepherd, you scatter the sheep. And I number one, I love my wife. We really work hard on leaning into one another in our marriage. And I think every affair, either by pastors or non-pastors, happens. Step one is when you're not leaning into your marriage. And so Pam and I, the language we use at our home is, are we leaning into one another? Now, is every day a glorious exercise in marital bliss? No, it's not. It's work. With 23 and a half years of marriage is gloriously hard work is what I tell people. But it's glorious. It's worth the hard work. But it's work. And so Pam and I realized the pressures and the tensions, the people that are pulling on us. And that happened, by the way, it happened when we pastored a church of 100 out in West Texas. It's the same pressure I feel, and I know people don't believe this, but it really feels the same when you're pastoring 10,000 or 100. The people pulling on you, the pressure to please people, the need to be involved in every little thing at the church can be just as demanding at a small country church as it is in a mega church. And so the safeguards that we have to put around ourselves starts at home. My wife is my first safeguard, but then there has to be like these, I think, layers of protection around you. So your wife should be able to look at you in the eye and know when you're not telling the truth. Then there should be close brothers and there should be spiritual fathers. So Pastor Garvin would be a close brother. He knows me 20 years. Then I have this third layer of spiritual dads who if any of those men told me to tap the brake, to stop, to pause, to reconsider, I would immediately stop and pause and reconsider without any hesitation, because I believe we only have as much spiritual authority as we're willing to submit to. And I believe that's delegated human authority, that he's looking around the earth. He's not looking for rock star pastors who can go create big crowds and write nice books. He's looking for people he can trust. Well, who can he trust? He can trust those who have submitted themselves to delegated spiritual human authority. And that sometimes that's messy. Sometimes that's not perfect. Sometimes that can feel oppressive or abusive. And certainly we don't submit to abusive authority. But I also know that by truly submitting myself to a group of men, that's when I am the most powerful, and that's when I can be the most trusted by God to do what he's called me to do.
Brady, you've been very candid. Let me ask you one more very candidly. What is your plan for pastoral succession?
Well, I'm 46 years old, so if you were to look at most people, you say, well, I'm in my prime, right? 46 is not old. I got lots of energy. I'm in good health. But I am already talking to my elders about my plan to not be the senior pastor at New Life. And now that might be 10 or 15 years from now. But I am shocked and stunned at how many pastors in their 50s or even their 60s have never even talked about it. And so what happens is, what happens if you do get sick? What happens if you do just run out of the energy that it takes to lead a church? But you've never talked about it. And I was just with a pastor who's almost 60 years old, and I asked him this question. I said, what's your plan to leave? He goes, I haven't even thought about it. And I said, well, let me tell you, if you don't plan, you will plan to fail. And this is why, and here's what I've told, I even said this to my team not long ago. I said, my favorite event in the Olympics, the Summer Olympics, is the 4x100 relay. I think it's my favorite event because you have 4 world-class sprinters running at world-class speeds, handing a baton to another person who is running at world-class speeds. To me, that's what succession should look like in the local church, but it very rarely does. What happens is, pastor who is strong, he's capable, finds himself at the end of his calling, career, if you want to call it that, but he's never been intentional about raising up sons. And if the picture I get is he's standing in the middle of the track with a baton in his hand, he's standing still, and there's nobody in front of him to hand it to. And I just said to my elders, I said, listen, I want to be running full steam. So let's say I'm 55, 60, and I'm still in good health. I don't want to wait until I can't run to hand the baton off. I said, I want to be in full stride, handing the baton off to someone else who is ready to run in full stride. And then that doesn't mean I'm going to disappear or retire. It means that I'm going to take a different role. And I just don't think a lot of pastors are even thinking about it. And if you look across the landscape of American churches, successions from first-generation leaders to second-generation leaders rarely goes well. And in fact, it tends to end up much more like a divorce than a wedding. And I believe families grow and children grow up, and sometimes it's time for kids to leave or time for kids to take over their own home. And the church should be celebrating weddings more than divorces. And so I'm just going to, and even if I have to leave earlier than I think I should, I would rather leave New Life as senior pastor earlier so that someone could run fast in front of me than to hold on for a few more years and then look up one day and have nobody to hand the baton to. And so those are conversations we are having, and I wish other churches would have them the same.
Looking back over your last 5 years, is there any 1 or 2 lessons, insights on succession that you'd like to hold up as these are the things that have really held me through, and that for others going through a very messy succession, if they can keep these 1 or 2 things in mind, that would be a big help to them?
Yeah, well, I said it earlier, but I want to say it again because don't do this alone. Find big brothers, find outside help that you can call and talk to. In fact, I know a pastor right now. He's going through a succession, and he's about 6 months into taking over for a scandalized church. And you know what he said to me? He said, I have never felt more lonely than I feel right now. And that broke my heart. And so I've been intentional. I call him and text him and check on him all the time because I know how lonely that feels. It's the loneliness that kills you. It's not that you're not capable of doing this, or that you're not skilled enough to do it or godly enough to do it. I just think sometimes you just feel alone and you feel isolated, and that's where the enemy does his best work in even godly people. So I'd say don't do it alone. Number two, I think, is almost as important, and that is to be patient. What typically senior pastors are type A. We are activators by nature. We like starting things and building things and growing things. And the best advice someone gave me said, Brady, when you go to New Life, they're going to need you to just pastor them for 3 to 4 years. And don't come up with any big new ideas or big new plans or trying to put your stamp on it. I think that's a lot of insecurity comes out when we are trying to put our stamp on something, trying to prove something to someone. And I just feel I'm just determined. I just made up my mind in those 3 years. You know, I made some changes and some things that needed to change, but I didn't, you know, the big new thing I didn't roll out for 3 or 4 years. I mean, and I had someone tell me, Brady, it takes 5 years for them to trust you, to build a culture that's yours, for people to really believe that you're what you say. And I at first I just nodded my head. I went, nah, I can do this in 2 or 3 years. Well, it's the truth. It takes 3 to 5 years, and 3 years under the best circumstances, 5 years because of mine were not normal. I think, and I've been here 5.5 years. And honestly, it's only been in the last year, the last 12 months of my time here at New Life, where I've been able to take a deep breath. I feel like New Life is healthy and normal. And by the way, normal's good. I think there are times when we underestimate how great normal is. And we're normal, we're healthy, we're vibrant, but it took 3 to 4 or 5 years. And I just want to tell guys, listen, just be patient. By the way, if God started the church, he is good at taking care of the church. What he needs for us to do is shepherd them, pastor them, but it's his baby. And so if the church where you're pastoring was never God's idea, I can't help you, and neither can God. But if the church that you are pastoring was God's idea to start in the beginning, he is much better at redeeming it and caring for it and renewing it than any of us can ever do. And so at the end of the day, I'm not trying to sound super spiritual, but at the end of the day, we have to trust God with the churches that we pastor and go to bed knowing we love them, we prayed for them, we are serving them to the best of our ability. And now, God, I go to bed tonight believing and trusting that we're in the palm of your hand. And at the end of the day, that's the only thing that will save you, if you really believe that. And I do.
Powerful message, powerful insights. Brady Boyd, New Life, Colorado Springs. Thank you for sharing your heart so candidly today.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. Hope this encourages and helps and blesses a lot of people.